So thank you, Mr. Vostatek, and thanks everyone for calling me here today. My name is Georgios Symeonidis. I'm an actuary. I work for the Hellenic Actuarial Authority, and I'm here today to present some of, actually a very brief introduction to the reform in Greece and where this has taken Greece in the matter of sustainability and adequacy, and maybe give one or two things someone should have in mind when reforming. Okay. So, the Greek pension system, you have three pillars. The second one is the IORPS, occupational pensions, and the third one is private insurance. Both are not so famous in Greece, so that leaves us with the first pillar, which is, of course, social security. Operates as a defined benefit, pay-as-you-go system, until recently only defined benefit. You have employer and employee contributions. Now, the question in Greece was when, how, and why to reform. Let's start with the timing. In 2010, after nothing has been done in Greece for the past 30 or 40 years, as far as pension reforms are concerned, what we have is Greece is on the verge of bankruptcy. So the Prime Minister turns to what we know as the Troika, the European Central Bank, the Commission, and the IMF, and he says we need money. And the Troika are willing to give the money, but of course they want something in return. They want stability in the system and solvency. So one of the basic things that had to be done was, of course, the pension reform. Then we have transitional period. People who give you money, much less money than the Greek bailout, want to be sure they get their money back. So they want things to happen quickly. So practically no transitional period for a lot of reforms. And then the third thing, why to reform? People were not ready for the reforms because people had not been thinking or discussing the reforms. No consensus among the people, the syndicates, and the government. So when there is no time to actually go through all these changes, everybody thinks they're irrational, while at the same time they might not be. So we have the first reform in 2010, and the key features are, we have a new pension logic. The pension is divided into two pieces. We have a safety net of a set amount of euro, and then we have a proportional amount, which is calculated based on how many years you work. Then we have lower accrual rates. They used to vary between 2 and 3% in the old system. Now they vary from 0.8 to 1.5. I'm not going into many technical details here. You might want to look at the paper when you receive it. Then the statutory retirement age, formerly not more than 62, practically, is now 65 and also linked to life expectancy, as is the trend in most European states. The full contributory period increases from 35 to 40 years. We have the indexation of benefits, formerly arbitrary. Every year, the Minister of Economy would go out and say, we have this fiscal situation and we need to have this indexation of pensions. Of course, he would succumb to the voters' will most of the times, and an imbalance in the system is caused. Pensionable earnings, they used to be for 5 or 10 last years immediately before receiving the pension. Now, the whole career counts. And of course, the most important clause, a clause which makes the system self-correcting, is that between 2009 and 2060, you need the increase in the GDP expenditure to be 2.5% or lower. If it's not, you have to go back and reform. So this actually curtails all the law, the legal procedure, which has to be taken in order for a quick reform in the future. Now, let's see where this reform took us. In the 2012 aging exercise, the increase in public pension expenditure from 2010 to 2060 is 1% of GDP only, while in the former aging exercise in 2009, it was 12.4. This would have led Greece to a staggering 24% of GDP for pensions. imagine you have a wallet and you're the state. And for every 4 coins in your wallet, 1 has to go to pensions. People would see this, politicians would see it, but nobody would do something about it because it's always about the voters. So, and of course, people did not realize something had to be changed because nobody was eager to tell them. This also made Greece comparable to other states and the euro area. So in 2010 already we had a big change. But let's see what happened from then on. Did we stop reforming? No. Because a year later, the government and the Troika sit down around the same table and they say, let's see, what was done from all the things that should have been done? And they realized it was not all of it. And they also realized they didn't have enough money to go by, I mean the government. So we had more reforms which brought the law closer to what we need today, like, for example, revising the list of heavy and hazardous occupations. There were janitors in there, and a janitor is not a hazardous occupation. So we also had our first balanced notional defined contribution system, which is copycat, I need to say that, from the Swedish system. We only changed the factor, to be honest, and we pretty much used all the annuities. Well, it's a success story, so why not use it? And recently, just a few days ago, we also had the statutory retirement age now 67. So even though 2 years ago we linked the 65 to the life expectancy, we now had to make it 67. A cunning question would be, why do it now? And a cunning answer would be, because you don't expect in 10 years' time of a crisis the life expectancy to increase. Because you spend less on health, and when you do spend less on health, what happens is people die more and they get sick more. So you would see your life, your retirement age being less than 65 when you needed it to be more than it. And an awful lot of reductions. I've put them here so when you receive this paper you can have them in case you need to look in detail, but what I will say is that people are now, in the bulk, getting less than half of their pension. Less than half of the pension they were getting before 2009. We have all kinds of reductions in the main and auxiliary pensions, monthly contributions, and money which goes back to the funds and which goes back to the social budget. And here we have a great question. Our fathers, they retired on very good legislation. They had like 3% every year. And of course, it was more than they should have. But is it legal in a defined benefit system to go and grab the money back because you suddenly realized you were not doing your job for like 30 years? Is it legally correct? And of course, is it ethically correct and morally correct? The question I have not yet to give, but we are looking into this from the legal perspective with a few young and bright lawyers because it is something very important. So the further discussions in 2011 and 2012 looked into the problem in the short term. And we had to devise a new plan which was called the medium-term fiscal strategy. And it initially started in 2011 to 2014, but it went on as we can see. And what we have is the social expenditure, actually the pension expenditure should remain under a certain amount of money. And up to now, everything looks good, but you see that the new, actually voted now in November, the new strategy needs us to even more curtail the expenditure. We're talking about cutting pensions, right? And this is not a good thing. Everybody listens to it and says, okay, well, you have less money to spend, but there are people lying behind the numbers. So what happens is, part of this whole strategy was exchanging and giving back some of the Greek bonds, getting some new ones, and the PSI, the public sector involvement. So all this exchange led to a nominal value of 8.3 billion euros of funds asset lost. So at the same time, you don't have enough money to go buy for pensions. At the same time, these are reduced at 8.3 billion in one day. And I'm talking nominal value, because if the funds have to spend, to sell these bonds in order to pay for pensions, then you get the market value, which is even less. Okay, and this is strictly financial, so I won't go into detail now. But you also see, what we all expected, that the at-risk of poverty rate for pensioners in Greece is increasing, and it's increasing alarmingly, and it will keep on for the next 2 years, we're all sure. While at the same time, in the European Union, you see an opposite trend. So, after all this presentation and a vague idea of what happened in Greece, I'm going back to my initial questions, and I say, we need to reform. Yes, we do. It's always important when you see a problem, you go there and correct it. You just don't do it in one day. You sit down and talk with the people. You try to educate the people as much as you can, and you try to show them that it is not viable to get pensions which are so high and the contribution rates are so low. And in the end, when you realize you've made a mistake, you go back and you give something to the people who lost a lot, and they're on the verge of bankruptcy themselves. So reparation, give something back to the people who we feel were the main victims in this process. And of course, do not stop reforming. Plan your reforms ahead, so you always know when the time comes, there's consensus among everyone, and the underlying floor is laid so everybody can go on and do what they should. And these are my sources. Thank you very much.